Good day, everyone, and welcome back to the continuing Singapore Summit. Our distinguished guest speaker for this session, His Excellency, Mr. Nadiem Anwar Makarim, is Minister of Education and Culture for the Republic of Indonesia. Many in the audience will, of course, also know Minister Nadiem as the founder of the Gojek ecosystem, the Indonesian tech unicorn that has disrupted traditional markets and conventional business models, and in doing so, helped provide livelihoods for many Indonesians, in the process, markedly improving the well-being of many across the informal sector. Gojek's push across ASEAN seeks to bring these benefits to many more across our region. In late 2019, Nadiem was named to Time 100 Next, Time magazine's list of rising stars helping to mold the future. At around that same time, President Jokowi tapped on Nadiem to be the Republic of Indonesia's new Minister of Education and Culture. It is with this large and important focus that Minister Nadiem will come speak to us this evening on the general topic of learning from COVID-19, redefining the future of education. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency, Minister Nadiem Makarim, to the summit and to this dialogue.
Hello. Hi, Professor Kwa. How are you?
Minister Nadiem, very well. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you for being part of this conversation. It's a great pleasure and honor to get to speak to you. I would like to begin our dialogue drawing on your past experience as risk taker, entrepreneur, and now as Minister of Education. I want to talk about disruption in the education sector in our part of the world, in Indonesia in particular. It has long been a truism. By long, I mean for at least the last 5 years. Technology, deglobalization has disrupted the education market. The shelf life of knowledge is falling rapidly. People are finding that they're having to deal with problems that they did not actually see the exact form of in university or in school. People are finding that lifelong learning is becoming much more important. And while all this was going on, the education sector was trying to find a new definition for itself. And then layered on top of that, COVID-19 hit us. You are in the midst of all this, formulating policies in face of this technological disruption and the COVID-19 situation. I wonder if I could get you to reflect a bit on how you see these large trends, the policies that Indonesia has put in place to contend with them, and the exigencies of the COVID-19 situation as well. Minister.
Well, thank you, Professor Kwa. It's an honor to be here and to be able to speak at the Singapore Summit. I think when we talk about disruption, the conventional kind of image of disruption is technology players coming in and transforming the way an industry operates. Usually, leaving the old ways of doing things behind. The education space is a little bit different. For one, I think that the one thing that will never be disrupted is the role of the teacher, the role of the mentor. The function may grow and develop and change slightly, but the one thing that I know for sure, coming from a technology background, I've never been more faced with the limits of technology during this COVID crisis. And so what I do know that will not be disrupted is the human element of teaching, even though some of the characteristics may change. The other thing is that what I think is disrupting education is not technology per se. What I think is disrupting education is the gap of relevancy that is becoming more and more evident as students are leaving the educational systems and entering this hyper changing dynamic world and realizing that, wait a minute, a lot of what I have been studying, a lot of what I have been doing is not preparing me for what the real world is like. So the crisis is coming from the realization of the users themselves. And so the disruption is actually a disruption of faith. There is a disruption of trust in the educational system, as kids getting brighter with every generation are coming out of schools and saying, look, this really has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. And I wish I was taught this. I wish I learned this. You hear this constantly from fresh graduates who are entering the workplace. And they're not just talking about their undergraduate experience. They're talking about their all the way high school, middle school experience as well. So I think the disruption is coming from the industry or the real world, where they're coming out of academia. And the fact that it's changing so rapidly is now bringing to light how the obsolescence that you mentioned, Professor, how quickly things are becoming obsolete. So I think there's a few trends that are going to be very interesting. Like I said before, the role of technology here is very interesting. I do not see in any way, shape, or form that the human element is going to be replaced by a machine or an AI. That I'm pretty convinced, and I am from a technology background. So from us, people in the technology space would love that everything is kind of automated and replaced, because most of us think it's efficient. But no, not teaching. Teaching is extremely complex. Teaching has a massively psychological and empathy-based dimensions of what makes learning happen. Learning is based on trust. Learning is based on respect. And that's very hard to achieve with an AI. You need that level of trust and interactivity that not even the most advanced AIs are really equipped yet to do those kind of interactions, words of encouragement, etc. What I do think technology will disrupt, it will disrupt the way the curriculum is administered. So I think that technology plays a pivotal role in the personalization and segmentation of students' passions and students' competencies. So right now, most educational systems in the world are kind of one size fits all. It's the general paradigm. We've been doing it for, hundreds of years this way, at least 100 years this way. And so there's a lot of inertia to change the way this is. But technology is coming in, and it's enabling us for the first time. It's enabling teachers to be able to dissect their classroom into groups, or dissect their classroom into individuals for the first time, and to see that actually they are at huge discrepancies in competency depending on subject matter. They have different interests, they have different learning processes. And so that personalization and segmentation is going to be the big breakthrough in technology. And so teachers that used to have lesson plans that were fixed may now break their class into groups that are more suited to how an online diagnostic that they took told the teacher to do it this way. They might follow a playlist of lessons that are customized just to match the right amount of difficulty and ease with which to understand a given concept. So the unbundling of the curriculum, the unbundling of concepts of modules of learning is going to be one of the biggest disruptive forces that technology will bring, because everyone can be diagnosed in their competency individually. I think the other way that the role of technology will play is it will disrupt the core function of the textbook, because the teacher will now be forced to facilitate the learning process of the child in an independent way. So before, there was a set material that needed to be passed on. Half the time it's unidirectional. Now the student is equipped with a huge body of knowledge that is available online, various tools that they can use themselves, and the teacher must help guide them through that journey to maximize the amount of learning that they have. Quite different from having to explain each of the concepts themselves. The teacher's role will shift to understanding the art of learning itself, to understanding how to create mental shortcuts to memorize and digest concepts easier. And so that shift from teacher or lecturer to mentor or coach is what I think. I don't like the word facilitator because it implies that there's no knowledge being passed from the adult to the child. But I prefer the word mentor or coach because it's a much more iterative process, and that will, I think, be the big shift there. And then I think finally, people never think about the role of technology in administering the educational system. For the large part of the world, the education system is still very large a national program. It's a national institution. And the management of this massive system, technology can play a incredibly positively disruptive role in how to increase efficiencies in the system, make sure that outcomes are monitored much more transparently, and to ensure that the how we measure performance can constantly get improved. Because unlike other sectors, the measure for performance in education is one of the biggest debates in education itself. This is what makes it so complicated as an industry, because the definitions of success, how you measure success, is still up for debate. There's a huge debate going on globally about what it means to succeed in the educational space. So I think those are some of the trends, Professor Kwaf, that I can.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Nadiem, for that really quite inspiring message. I mean, the first point I take away from that is thankfully you do not see me replaced by an AI. You talk about how the position of the teacher remains central, that empathy and trust remain important. Personalization of the education journey becomes a key phrase with which we think about education. And that we no longer want to think about a teacher giving knowledge to someone, but instead the learning experience becomes almost a joint product for which, like you say, there's mentoring and coaching prospects there, but it's a joint product that's customized and specialized.
Yes.
Because we need that.
Sorry, the analogy that I like to use, because you use customizes, it's almost like the technology is enhancing almost like cyborg capabilities in the teacher. So imagine a teacher that is able at any given time to know exactly where their student is in every arc of learning. That's the kind of power and ability to enhance teachers' capabilities that kind of AI or just technological systems can do. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And that, to use language that we might be thinking about in business school environments, that is happening on the supply side, or the producing the product. On the demand side, we've got similar disruptions, because there's a mismatch now in what graduates many universities push out, and what the demands of the job market are, the demands for what work they need to do. And there too, thinking needs to be redone. I mean, just listening to you, I almost feel like there's a tech unicorn emerging in this description. But maybe we'll leave that for another time. The COVID-19, of course, has accelerated these changes, because it's made the technological description that you've put full front on in the way in which we're engaging in the education experience. Could you share a bit what's happening in Indonesia on that front, on the COVID-19 and the immediate needs front?
Yeah. So COVID is it's very interesting what it's doing in the educational space, because the short-term impact of COVID to learning outcomes is almost universally negative, I would say, in the world. There is I don't think there's any country that can say that within a few months their entire educational system was able to go online without sacrifices in learning outcomes. I find that humans take years to adapt to new modes of teaching and learning, and so I think net we have to first be honest and say, quite sadly, that learning outcomes will suffer, and we don't know how permanent those effects will be. Um, we will have to do studies over time, over a time series, and later on see what the impact of this kind of lost year of learning has created, because it's not just the learning outcomes of teachers and parents and students struggling to do this new mode of learning. We never actually talk about the psychological effects of isolation at home for the kids. the loneliness factor of not being able to see their friends, some of which maybe close to a year now, or to just go out in nature and be a child. So we tend to categorize a child's brain by their, left brain, right brain. We tend to generalize, saying, oh, this is their academic side and cognitive side, and this is their emotional and well-being side. That's not really how the brain works. These are interconnected concepts whereby, for example, when I became minister, one of the most fundamental things that I learned from of pedagogy is that psychological safety is the precondition to learning. That without psychological safety, there practically is no learning that's happening. Child is the same and adult is also the same. So just imagine the level we've never seen before, the level of loneliness and potential frustration and anxiety that a lot of isolation and being kept indoors does to a child. And that in turn affects the learning. Now, having said that, there are, in the long term, there are things that are happening during COVID right now that we've never seen before at this scale. Okay, we've never ever seen before the number of teachers in both. Well, we've seen this probably happening in the developed world more often, but never before in the developing world have we seen as many teachers struggle, experiment, and adopt new technologies, trying every platform to see what is best suited for them and what is best suited for their students. So there's this kind of forced mass adoption that we've never really seen in history among the teaching community. And I think that will create some very, very interesting developments and innovations. I think the teachers, for the first time, as they go in here, will then, I think the biggest problem with education technology is that it's not really built by and for teachers as much, not always. And so this COVID crisis, I think, is going to be bringing teachers to the forefront of providing input, feedback, and maybe some of them will start their own companies in ed tech spaces because now they're involved, now they're users, now they've adopted. So that's one factor that I think will create, much faster acceleration of technology adoption in the education space. The second thing that we've never seen is parents. We've never seen parents not only attempt to use all of these technologies, we've never ever before, I don't think, at least in my lifetime, remember as many parents finally finding out what their children's curriculum is. What is a curriculum? Same with me. I have 3 babies right now, and I am forced to become a teacher at home. And so we never before have parents sought information, though in frustration, and obviously parents are adapting throughout this process, but they've never ever before been thrown at the forefront of having to manage the education of their kids. And so this is an incredible trend that is happening worldwide where parents are finally getting involved in their child's education, whether they want to or not, because they're there and they need help. So I think what you'll see is a change in paradigm or mindset, not just on the technology adoption, but also in the sense that, hold on, I am the primary educator of my child. I think more and more parents are realizing this, that school is not the place to outsource an education. School is there to enhance the education that you give your child. And I think that will have a very powerful effect on how both mothers and fathers do this. Another tangent, which I won't go too deeply, which I've experienced and a lot of my friends have experienced, is the role of fathers now because a lot of fathers are for the first time working from home, and their role in the household and in parenting and in teaching really transforming as well. On top, so I think that there are very, very optimistic trends that may lead to things that may have taken 5 to 10 years before to achieve, to be achieved in a shorter time frame because of all these forced adoptions of changes that are happening.
Thank you, Nadiem, for that statement about how, although you began by saying no one in the world is saying that COVID-19 is a good thing that's been happening to them. In this crisis, there's also opportunity. And it sounds to me like what you're describing is a situation where many agents in society are making sure that they're not letting this crisis go to waste. They're retooling themselves, they're going back, they're rediscovering what it means to be part of this family in this education process. All that's very good. I wanted, if I may, to try and probe a little bit into maybe a slightly darker side of this picture. And that darker side has to do with inequality and the digital divide. You know, we've realized how important it is that access to digital technology, information, communications technology has become in getting through this period. Now, not all the world is wired up. In Indonesia alone, across its tens of thousands of islands, the degree of internet penetration varies. So I'd like to get your view, Minister, on how you see the prospects for inequality, income mobility, possible social polarization emerge as we go through this, and what we must do to guard our societies against that.
Yeah. So COVID, Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world with the fourth largest educational system in the world because of its population. It is a gargantuan task, even pre-COVID, to be able to provide high quality, even just quality education across so many different regions with massive variations in culture, language, geographical boundaries, infrastructural discrepancies. So it was already a massive challenge to begin with. When COVID hit, it exacerbated those inequities that the haves, and here defined by socioeconomic have and also access to internet haves, were less um, affected negatively during this distance learning period than the have-nots and the ones that do not have access to internet or stable electricity, and so on. So the gap definitely widened, and not just in Indonesia. I think this is happening all over the world right now,
Yes.
where the haves and have-nots, the gap has widened slightly. But you know, if COVID did not happen, the importance of closing that technological gap would not have been so obvious. So it's during these crises that governments, social sector, civil society, they get shock therapied to accelerate things that before they were like, yeah, we know this is important, but there are other things that seem more urgent, right? But when COVID hit and we all suddenly had to learn from home, and work from home, you know, suddenly governments and organizations, companies were thrown, at, at the forefront of this digital inequality problem. And everyone got to work, and everyone rallied around this concept of digital access being a fundamental human right. And I think that is precious, that realization and that common civic awareness that we have to correct this. So what happened in the government of Indonesia is now all those plans for connecting villages, et cetera, just got accelerated. They all got funded. They all got suddenly activated. A lot of what I've been pushing for digitalizing schools and doing it relatively quickly, in the next 5 years, is now being accelerated as a result of that. So that's only one element of this inequity. That's the digital access inequity. It is one of the greatest. It is one of the top equalizers that you can have,
Yes.
but it is not the number one equalizer by far in the education space. And this is not the case with other sectors, but in the education space, I can say this confidently. The biggest the biggest factor that can level the playing field is people. No matter which way you look at educational reform, technology, revised curriculum, infrastructure, facilities, nothing has the kind of impact on learning outcomes of sending great teachers to the schools that need it most. It sounds so simple, but it really is. It's the key to bridging inequality is about getting the best teachers or the better teachers to come and teach in the schools that need it most and mentor the schools that come from those less fortunate regions. So I want to just kind of remind the audience that as much as great as technology is, nothing replaces like a fantastic principal that you send to the island of, say, Maluku or Papua, and they just autonomously create reforms there in numeracy, literacy, critical thinking, and so on, and have a love of mentoring other teachers. So that is the great equalizer, then followed very closely by technology and internet access, I would say. But it's a challenge. It's a massive challenge, and we need to act fast before the gap becomes unbridgeable.
Thank you, Minister, for that powerful and inspiring statement, really, that all our societies can take lessons from what you've just described to us. The importance of teachers in the great chain of production of the next generation and of all our futures in a sustainable way, and the thwarting role that technology has to play in bridging that digital divide. That's a wonderful message that, you know, I'm so glad we've been able to communicate that to this audience. I'm mindful of the time, and I would like to close out this inspiring conversation with you, Minister, by giving you an opportunity, or actually the reverse, by allowing the students and the innovators and the entrepreneurs in the audience to hear a personal message from you. In light of, you know, your own entrepreneurial experience, in light of your policy-making experience now in ministry, what do you tell the student today in Indonesia or anywhere across Southeast Asia? What is the important message they need to remember to come out of these trends and this COVID-19 situation in a good way?
It's a very difficult question. I have a few answers probably, and if you don't mind, Professor Kwa, I'd like to focus on students.
Certainly.
That's okay, because I think if I focus on the other ones, I would take an hour or so. I would like to, you know, I hope you don't mind, Professor Kwa, if I, you know, gave some pragmatic advice as opposed to, you know, usually it's the standard inspirational advice, but I hope to give a little bit more pragmatic advice. I think the first advice is understand that, you know, learn your values from your parents, but be mindful of taking career advice from them. I think that would be my first word of caution. There, the rapidly changing industries, they change very quickly, even before a generation, and so parents never actually get to see the full cycle of an industry cycle, and it's already changed. And so a lot of what advice that you would get from the parents' generation is often outdated by the time that you're entering the workforce. So the best kind of advice to get for career is actually peers that are probably 5 years ahead of you or 7 years ahead. That's the greatest spot to ask for advice for career. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't expect, and this is coming from the Minister of Education, that is trying to transform universities to be much more open and collaborative. But you cannot wait for the system to change. You have to take things into your own hands and actually either shape the educational environment that you are in, especially in higher education, where you are given more of that ability to do, or seek it wherever you can to find the relevant skills that you know you need for your career. So you have to take it in your hands. You cannot be outsourcing this and complaining about your educational institutions, because by the time you do that, it'll be too late. You're already going to be running the real world. So the amount of activism that students need to take and responsibility for their own education, no matter what their university is teaching them, is extremely important. And it will continue to be important no matter how many years you are in your job. The other thing is this concept of if you as students do not start to be extremely conscious of the growth mindset and being aware and having fun at not knowing things and constantly be curious at learning and learning and learning. If you don't train that muscle of curiosity and a continuous thirst of learning, you will fall behind. You will fall behind because none of your skills or the knowledge that you know today may be relevant in a few years. So the greatest competitive advantage is going to be adaptability, is going to be creativity and independence of learning, the continuous curiosity and hunger to learn new things. And by the way, learning is a competency. There are skills that you can obtain to how to learn. That's a real thing. There are faster ways of how to learn. And I think finally, what I would tell students is, I think despite the fact that we are in this crazy crisis and that nothing seems to make sense, it is these times that actually train your mental resilience the most. And I believe that, especially for the higher education kids in universities today, and high school as well, going through this will no doubt strengthen your resilience. And that feeds into adaptability in the workforce later on. And so, despite how tough things are today, know that if you survive this, if you get through this, this may be one of the strongest generations we've ever had. And so the ability to then go out and take those risks, because nothing scares you anymore. You've gone through the craziest time in recent human history. Taking those risks may not be as scary as the last generation may have thought. And so I urge you to follow your heart and take those risks in order to achieve something great for yourself and maybe for your country.
Minister Mas Menteri Pak Nadiem, it has been a privilege and an honor to get to speak to you. And thank you so much for all the frank statements you've made, the powerful, inspiring messages you've delivered for us. Thank you for joining the summit. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Kwa. It's been an honor.